This is my story. A story of a man who broke someone I loved, then turned his eyes to me, believing I would be just as easy to destroy. But what he didn't know was that I had been watching, I had been waiting, and I had been preparing. Let's begin. Before we start, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you're new here, kindly subscribe for more powerful stories about justice, wisdom, and the strength that hides in silence. Let's get started. He met my stare with lustful eyes, forgetting we had a history, and that I'd been waiting patiently to draw him into my trap. The festival drums pounded through the village square, but all I could hear was the rushing in my ears. My hands went cold, my throat tightened. There he stood, laughing with the elders, his chest broad, his voice loud, his reputation gleaming like polished bronze. The villagers clapped when he spoke. The young men sought his advice. The women looked away respectfully when he passed. But I didn't look away. I stared, and when his eyes finally found mine across the crowd, something flickered in them. Interest, hunger, the same look he'd given her years ago. My best friend, the quiet woman he destroyed. He smiled at me then, confident and slow, the smile of a man who believes every woman is his for the taking. Adana was her name, soft-spoken, gentle, the kind of woman who smiled with her whole face and laughed like rainfall. We grew up together, running through cassava fields, braiding each other's hair by the stream, sharing secrets under the mango tree. When he first courted her, I thought she'd found her match. He brought her gifts. He spoke sweetly to her family. The elders praised him as disciplined, hardworking, a man of God. She married him with joy in her eyes and hope in her heart. But within months, that joy began to dim. Her laughter came less often. Her smiles became smaller, tighter, like something folded and put away. When I asked if she was happy, she'd pause too long before answering. "He's a good provider," she'd say, not meeting my eyes. Then, one day, as I was leaving her compound, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was desperate. "If anything happens to me," she whispered, "remember his face." The village called her obedient. They said she was the model wife, respectful, never raising her voice, always serving with a smile. The other women held her up as an example to their daughters. "See how Adana behaves. That is how a wife should be. Quiet, enduring, submissive." But I saw what they refused to see. The way she flinched when he spoke sharply. The bruises she explained away as clumsiness. The way her voice grew smaller each time I visited, until it became almost a whisper. The elders praised her silence as virtue. Her mother-in-law called her blessed for having such patience. Even her own mother told her to endure, to pray, to be grateful she had a husband who provided. "Marriage is hard," she said. "A woman must learn to bend." So she bent, and bent, and bent, until the day she broke completely. The breaking came quietly, as most destructions do. I arrived at her compound one morning to find her sitting on the ground, staring at nothing. Her wrapper was askew, her hair was uncombed. When I called her name, she didn't respond. I knelt before her, touched her hand. It was cold. "Adana, what happened?" She looked at me then, and her eyes were empty, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made her who she was. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She had stopped speaking entirely, not because she couldn't, but because words no longer mattered. For 3 weeks, she remained like that, silent, withdrawn, moving through her days like a ghost haunting her own life. I begged her to leave him. I offered her my home, but she only shook her head, tears running silently down her face. Then, one morning, they found her by the river, dead, drowned. The elders called it an accident. He mourned like a wounded lion, loud, public, dramatic. He tore his shirt. He wept before the elders. He spoke of how much he'd loved her, how devoted he'd been, how her loss had shattered him. The village gathered around him, offering comfort, bringing food, telling him it wasn't his fault. She was troubled, they said. Some women are just weak. They buried her quickly, as was custom. They prayed over her grave. They told him to find peace, to move forward, to eventually remarry, because a man needs a wife. I stood at the edge of the burial, watching him through the crowd, watching how perfectly he played the grieving husband, watching the village believe every tear, every word, every carefully crafted lie. And I made a promise to Adana's silent grave. I would remember, I would watch, and when the time came, I would make sure he paid for what he'd done. Not with my tears, not with my rage, but with his own carefully constructed reputation. 3 years passed before I returned to the village. I'd left to work in the city, to study, to build myself into someone stronger than the girl who'd watched her friend die. When I came back for the festival, I was different, calmer, quieter, more observant. He noticed me almost immediately. I felt his eyes on me during the dancing, during the feast, during the prayers. After the ceremonies, he approached me near the food tables, his smile wide and practiced. "I don't think we've met properly," he said, though we had. "I'm Chike." I let my eyes stay soft, my voice gentle. "I know who you are. Everyone speaks highly of you." His chest swelled with pride. "And you've been away, working, learning, growing. A woman who improves herself, that's rare." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Are you here to stay?" I smiled, the smile I'd practiced in mirrors for months. Calm, respectful, exactly the kind of smile Adana used to give. "Perhaps," I said, "if I find a reason to." His eyes gleamed. "Then I'll give you one." Within days, the village was buzzing. Chike, the respected elder, the strong provider, the man who lost his wife so tragically, had set his eyes on me. People congratulated me. Women pulled me aside to tell me how blessed I was. "He's a good man," they said, "disciplined, hard-working, a man of God." My mother looked pleased. "He's offering you security, respect, a good home." I listened to every word, my face showing gratitude, while my mind catalogued each lie. The man they described wasn't real. It was a performance, a mask worn so long the village had forgotten what lay beneath. But I hadn't forgotten. I'd spent 3 years learning about men like him, reading about patterns of cruelty, speaking with women who survived what Adana didn't. I knew his type, I knew his methods, and now I knew something else. The village's admiration of him was his greatest protection. They'd invested too much in believing he was good to admit they'd been wrong. That protection would become his prison. When he formally asked my family to allow him to court me, I didn't refuse. My mother was shocked. "You'll accept?" I nodded slowly. "He seems kind. The village speaks well of him." She embraced me, relieved. But my father studied my face. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. "I'm more certain of anything." The courtship began, and I played my role perfectly. I was respectful but not eager, interested but not desperate. I let him lead conversations, let him make decisions, let him feel powerful and in control. With every interaction, his confidence grew. He believed he'd found another Adana, another quiet woman who would bend to his will, who would absorb his cruelty in silence, who would eventually break just as she had. What he didn't know was that my quietness wasn't submission, it was observation. Every word he said, every gesture he made, every moment his mask slipped, I filed away, building a case that would eventually bury him. The day I entered his house as her intended bride, I saw immediately what Adana had lived with. Everything was rigid, controlled, arranged according to his specifications. The furniture sat at exact angles, the walls were bare except for religious symbols he displayed like shields. Even the air felt tight, restricted, as though the house itself had learned to hold its breath. He walked me through each room, explaining his expectations. I keep an orderly home. I expect my wife to maintain it. Of course, I said softly. The kitchen is where you'll spend most of your time. Meals must be ready exactly when I return from the farm. I understand. And visitors, I don't encourage unnecessary socializing. A wife's place is in her home. I nodded, watching his face carefully. This was the same speech Adana had heard, the same rules, the same cage. He was showing me the trap,
And I did,
confident I'd walk
because
into
traps
it
work
willingly.
both ways. You just have to know when to spring them. The first test came on the third day. I'd prepared his evening meal, setting it before him as he settled onto his mat. He took one bite of the soup, then pushed the bowl away sharply. "It's too salty." I'd made it perfectly. I knew because I tasted it 3 times. But I said nothing, keeping my face neutral. "I'm sorry, I'll remake it." He watched me closely, waiting for resistance, for argument, for any sign of defiance. When I simply stood and reached for the bowl, something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, victory. He thought he was training me, conditioning me to accept criticism without question, just as he'd trained Adana. "No," he said, waving his hand. "Sit. Eat it yourself. You'll learn from your mistakes." I sat. I ate the perfectly seasoned soup while he watched, and when I finished, I looked up with gentle eyes. "Thank you for teaching me." He smiled then, leaning back, completely confident. He believed he'd won the first battle. He had no idea the war had just begun. The verbal cruelty started slowly, testing my boundaries like fingers probing a wound. "You're slower than my last wife," he'd say when I served dinner. Or, "Can't you do anything without being told?" His voice would carry the edge Adana must have heard daily, that tone that cuts without raising volume. I never reacted. I'd bow my head slightly, apologize softly, and continue whatever I was doing. Each time I didn't fight back, didn't defend myself, didn't show hurt, his confidence grew. He began speaking to me the way you'd speak to a child or a servant, dismissive, condescending, cruel in small, constant ways. One evening, he grabbed my wrist as I cleared his plate, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to startle. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." I lifted my eyes to his, keeping them soft, almost afraid. "Yes." He held my gaze for a long moment, searching for defiance. Finding none, he released me. Good. My first wife had to learn that lesson too. My heart hammered, but my face stayed calm. He was showing me his hand, and I was memorizing every card. Old Mama Nkem appeared at the market on the 5th week. She was ancient, her back bent like a question mark, her eyes clouded but sharp. Everyone knew she was wise, that she saw things others missed. As I bought vegetables, she touched my arm. "Walk with me, child." We moved slowly between the stalls, her gnarled hand on my elbow. "The house you've entered is haunted," she said quietly, "not by spirits, but by memory." "I know," I replied. She studied me. "Most women would run. Why do you stay?" I measured my words carefully. Because running doesn't stop men like him. It just gives them time to find someone new. Her fingers tightened on my arm. "What you're planning will require patience. Great patience." "I have nothing but patience, Mama." She nodded slowly. Justice moves slowly, but it arrives completely, like rain building in clouds. When it falls, nothing stays dry. We walked in silence for a moment. Then she whispered, "The elders will need proof. Collect it carefully." I looked at her. "You'll help me?" "I've been waiting for someone strong enough for years." Her smile was grim. He's hurt many. You're just the first brave enough to do something about it. The night he tried to break me completely came without warning. I'd served his meal, cleaned the compound, prepared for bed. He entered the room where I slept, his shadow filling the doorway. The air changed immediately. Dangerous, thick. "Come here," he said, his voice different, lower, harder. I stood slowly, my heart racing but my face calm. He stepped closer, backing me against the wall. His hand came up, not striking, but hovering near my face, a threat made physical. "Do you know what happens to wives who don't please their husbands?" His breath was hot against my face. "Do you know what happened to Adana when she stopped trying?" My blood turned to ice and fire at once. He'd said her name, finally. Dropped the mask just enough to reveal the monster. This was the moment. I could run. I could scream. I could break. Or I could do what I'd planned for 3 years. I lifted my eyes to his, and for the first time, I let him see something other than submission. I let him see knowledge, power, certainty. "I know exactly what happened to Adana," I said, my voice steady and cold, "because I was there." The change in the room was instant. His hand froze, his eyes widened. For the first time since I'd met him, Chike looked uncertain. "What did you say?" I didn't repeat myself. Instead, I stepped forward, and he actually stepped back. "Did you think I didn't know?" I asked softly. "Did you think I came here by accident? That I smiled at you because I found you charming?" His mouth opened, closed. You're her best friend, the one who watched you destroy her piece by piece, the one who stood at her grave and promised she wouldn't die for nothing." The mask he wore cracked completely. Beneath it, I saw fear, raw and real. "You have no proof of anything," he said, but his voice shook. I smiled then, and it wasn't gentle anymore. "I have 3 years of watching, 3 years of learning, 3 years of waiting for you to show me exactly who you are." I moved closer still, and you performed perfectly. His back hit the wall. "You can't." "I already have." I let the words sink in like stones in water. The question now, Chiki, is what happens next, and that choice is mine, not yours. I watched his face cycle through emotions. Anger, confusion, fear. The loss of control was physical to him, like losing his balance. "Say her name," I commanded quietly. His jaw clenched. "Adana." Again, with respect. "Adana." His voice cracked. "Tell me what you did to her." "I didn't." I stepped closer still, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell me. Every word you said to break her, every time you made her feel small, every moment you chose cruelty. Say it." The silence stretched between us like a rope pulled taut. Finally, he spoke, his words coming slow and bitter. "I made her afraid. I made her doubt herself. I made her think she deserved it. Why? Because I could." The honesty was worse than any lie. Because she was weak and I was strong, and that's how it works. Not anymore. I pulled a small bundle from my wrapper. Letters, diary pages, testimonies I'd gathered from other women he'd courted, hurt, discarded. "You have a choice now. You can leave this village tonight and never return, or you can stay, and I'll take these to the elders tomorrow." His hands shook with rage. "You will not believe you. They will not believe you. They respect me. Then stay. Let's find out." I moved toward the door. "One more thing, Chiki. If you choose to stay, you will live by my rules now, exactly as you made her live by yours." He stayed. Pride wouldn't let him run. By morning, I'd moved my sleeping mat to the main room and given him the small back room where Adana had spent her last months. I prepared his meals, but only after I'd eaten first. I spoke to him only when necessary, my voice cool and factual. When he protested, I simply looked at him until he fell silent. The shift was subtle enough for the village to not notice immediately, but he felt it in every moment. The loss of authority in his own home, the inability to command respect from the woman he'd chosen to break. One evening, he tried to reassert control. "This is my house. You will do as I say." I set down the pot I was stirring and turned to face him fully. "This is the house where Adana died, and now it's the house where you will learn what she felt every single day." His hand raised, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, I didn't move, didn't flinch, just held his gaze. His hand lowered slowly. The violence in him had nowhere to go because I'd removed the target. You can't break what refuses to show fear. The village began to notice during the third week, small things at first. Chike stopped joining the men at the palm wine bar. He no longer held court at the market. When people greeted him, his responses were brief, distracted. The women started whispering, "Have you seen Chike lately? He looks tired." Maybe the new wife is difficult. No, she seems so gentle, so quiet. But Mama Nkem watched with knowing eyes. She began sitting near my compound each morning, a silent witness. Other women started joining her. Old women who'd lived long enough to see patterns, to recognize the slow turn of justice. One morning, a young woman approached me at the stream. Her eyes were frightened but determined. "He courted me once before Adana. I refused him because..." She swallowed hard. "Because something felt wrong." I said softly, "Tell me." Her story spilled out. Others followed. 3 women, 5, 7, each with similar experiences. His charm that turned to cruelty, his need for control, his anger when questioned. I listened to each one, my heart breaking and strengthening at once.
"Will you tell the elders?" I asked them. They looked at each other, afraid. "If I stand with you," I said, "will you stand with me?" The gathering happened on the new moon, when truth is hardest to hide. Mama Nkem called the elders to the sacred Iroko tree, claiming an urgent matter needed judgment. They came reluctantly, confused by the presence of so many women. Chike was summoned. He arrived, confident, believing this was some minor dispute he could easily dismiss. Then I stood. "Elders, I come before you to speak truth about a man you've honored, a man who hides cruelty behind respect and violence behind prayers." Chike's face went dark. "This is nonsense. The grief over my late wife has made her..." "Let her speak," Mama Nkem interrupted. "You will have your turn." I told Adana's story. Every detail I'd witnessed, every bruise I'd seen, every warning sign the village had ignored. Then, one by one, the other women stood. Each shared their story. The pattern became undeniable. 8 women, 8 similar experiences, 8 times the village had chosen to look away. The elders' faces shifted from skepticism to discomfort to something approaching shame. Chike tried to interrupt, to defend himself, to dismiss us as jealous, bitter, confused. But the weight of collective truth is heavier than any single lie. Finally, the head elder raised his hand for silence. Chike made one final attempt to reclaim his power. He stood tall, his voice booming. "These women conspire against me because I'm a strong man who demands respect. My late wife was weak. She couldn't handle the strength a real marriage requires." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I thought he might sway them. Then Mama Nkem spoke, her voice cracking with age, but strong with authority. "Strength that requires breaking others is not strength. It's cowardice dressed in authority." She turned to the elders. "For years, we've confused cruelty with discipline, control with leadership, and a woman's silence with consent. This man didn't love his wife, he owned her. And when she couldn't survive his ownership, we called it her weakness instead of his violence." Chike's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward me, and several men had to restrain him. "You destroyed me. I gave you everything." "You gave me what you gave Adana," I replied calmly. "Rules, control, fear. The only difference is I knew what you were from the beginning." The head elder stood. "Enough. We've had enough." The judgment came swift and absolute. Chike would lose his position among the elders. His farm, inherited through his marriage to Adana, would be returned to her family. He would be barred from courting any woman in the village without the explicit permission of the Women's Council, a council that would be formed immediately. He would remain in the village, not as an exile, which might grant him dignity, but as a living reminder of what happens when cruelty is mistaken for strength. Most importantly, he would speak publicly at the next festival, confessing his treatment of Adana and asking forgiveness from her family. If he refused any of these terms, he would be cast out completely, his name struck from the village records, his existence erased from our collective memory. Chike's face went pale. "You can't." "We can," the head elder said quietly, "and we should have done this years ago." As the crowd dispersed, Chite looked at me with pure hatred. "You've ruined me." I met his eyes one final time. "No, you ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone else could see it." The house that once was a prison of rules became a place of silence. Not the terrified silence Adana had lived with, but the heavy quiet of consequences fully realized. Chike moved through his days like a shadow of himself. The villagers who once sought his advice now avoided his gaze. The men who once called him brother now found reasons to be elsewhere. I stayed in the compound for 3 more months, not out of obligation, but to ensure he understood the full weight of what he'd done. Each morning, I prepared meals we ate in silence. Each evening, I sat where Adana used to sit, reading her diary aloud so he would hear her words, her pain, her slow erasure. He never interrupted, never spoke unless spoken to. The man who needed to control every moment now had no control at all. When I finally left, moving back to my family's compound, he didn't protest. The house stood as it was, ordered, empty, and haunted not by Adana's ghost, but by his own choices made physical. Something shifted in the village after that. Women who'd been silent began to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a new firmness to their voices. When a young husband raised his hand to his wife in the market, 3 older women immediately intervened. "We don't do that anymore," they said simply. The Women's Council met every full moon, discussing not just Chike's behavior, but patterns they'd all ignored for too long. They created new customs. A widow would no longer be forced to marry her late husband. A woman could refuse a suitor without shame. A wife could leave a dangerous home without being told to endure. The changes were small, but small changes in clay eventually shift mountains. Young girls watched and learned that silence wasn't their only option, that speaking truth wasn't disobedience but courage. And when they grew into women, they would teach their own daughters differently than they'd been taught. Adana's death, which the village had tried to bury as quietly as her body, became instead a turning point. Her story, finally told, became a foundation for change. I visited her grave on the anniversary of her death. The rainy season had made the earth soft and new grass grew thick over the mound. I knelt in the mud, not caring about my wrapper, and placed my hand on the ground. "It's done," I whispered. "Not perfectly, not completely, but it's done." I told her about Chike's judgment, about the Women's Council, about the small ways the village was learning to see what they'd chosen not to see before. "I couldn't save you," I said, my voice breaking, "but I made sure you weren't forgotten. I made sure your death meant something." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and earth and growing things. Somewhere in the village, children were laughing. Life continues, as it always does, but now it continues with your truth acknowledged, your pain validated, your silence finally broken. I stayed until the sun began to set, watching the light change from gold to amber to deep purple. When I finally stood, my knees were muddy and my eyes were wet, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. "Rest now, my sister. I'll remember for both of us." The elders called a special meeting 3 months later. The entire village gathered, confused and curious. The head elder stood beneath the Iroko tree, his face grave. "We have failed," he said simply. The crowd stirred with shock. Elders didn't admit failure. We honored a man's strength without questioning what he did with it. We praised a woman's silence without asking why she was silent. We mistook endurance for virtue and control for leadership. He looked directly at me. A young woman had to teach us what we should have known, that true strength protects the weak rather than preying on them, that silence can be wisdom but can also be fear, and we're responsible for knowing the difference. He turned to Chiki, who stood at the edge of the crowd, diminished and alone. This day, when we tell stories to our children about what makes a good man, we'll no longer speak only of provision and discipline. We'll speak of kindness, of respect, of the courage it takes to be gentle. The elder's voice strengthened, and we'll tell Adana's story, not as a warning about weak women, but as a warning about strong men who use their strength wrongly. Chike's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward me, and several men had to restrain him. "You destroyed me! I gave you everything!" "I gave you what you gave, Adana," I replied calmly. "Rules, control, fear. The only difference is I knew what you were from the beginning." The head elder stood. "Enough. We've heard enough." Years have passed since that day. I'm older now, my own hair showing silver, my hands marked by time and work. People still ask me why I did it, why I walked into danger deliberately, why I risked becoming another Adana. The answer is always the same: because someone had to. Because silence in the face of injustice is its own form of violence. Because Adana deserved to be remembered not for how quietly she suffered, but for how her suffering forced us all to change. Chike is an old man now, living on the edge of the village in a house smaller than the one he lost. Sometimes I see him at the market, moving slowly, his eyes down. The fire that once burned in him has long since died. He's not a villain anymore, just a cautionary tale, a reminder of what we've learned. The Women's Council still meet every full moon. Young women train in trades once reserved for men. Marriage is no longer a trap, but a choice. And every year, on the anniversary of Adana's death, the village gathers at her grave to remember that cruelty always returns home, that silence is not weakness, but often wisdom. And sometimes the woman who looks quiet is simply listening and remembering everything. Not every battle requires violence. Sometimes the strongest weapon is patience. Sometimes the loudest statement is silence. And sometimes justice takes years, but arrives completely. We hope this story moved you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson did you take from this? And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. Subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, wisdom, and strength. Thank you for listening.